In the perilous landscape of medieval beauty standards, surviving wasn't enough. You had to look like you'd survived, and not just survive, but thrive in a way that screamed, "I don't dig ditches, my hands are soft, and I know the baker by name, not by trade." It was a look that set you apart from the commoners, marked you as someone who didn't break a sweat unless it was because of, well, how hot you were. You had to commit to the look, whether your blood was as pure as the driven snow or as rich and dark as, well, a glass of blood. Because back then, if you looked anything less than angelically pale, you were basically broadcasting, "I come from peasant stock. My ancestors dug ditches, and tonight I'm eating cabbage for dinner again." The symptoms of this condition were oddly specific and deeply painful. Imagine waking up to find that instead of a face staring back at you, you saw a Picasso painted by a shaky hand. Your nose, once the center of your face, suddenly found itself on an angle. It wasn't just crooked, it had morphed into a new dimension, a realm where symmetry took a vacation and gravity decided to stay. And then, as if nature's cruel joke, your skin refused to cooperate. Patches of your face erupted in red blotches, tempting fate and adding a dash of infection to the mix. Picture this: a ball where the guest of honor is looking like a patchwork quilt, not the distinguished kind, but the one destined for a charity auction. Talk about a humbling experience. And then there were the times when your jawline would decide to take a break from holding up your face and give in to a droopy slump that made you look as though you'd just read the worst line in a sad sonnet. These weren't just bad days, these were bad genes. Ancestral baggage passed down from parents who had their own run-ins with nature's twisted sense of humor. Their misfortune became your birthright. But hold on, because there's a twist to this tale. This wasn't a fairy godmother gone rogue and decided to make mischief. No, it was your good old friend, Mother Nature, playing her favorite game of hide and seek. The catch, she hid your features with such enthusiasm that you looked less like yourself and more like a victim of a particularly nasty gargoyle attack. Welcome to the madhouse of medieval aesthetics, where looking peculiar wasn't just trendy, it was mandatory. If you were rich, influential, or simply had a heart-wrenching backstory involving unfaithful lovers or a haunted past, your face needed to reflect that. After all, if you looked ordinary, people might assume you lived an ordinary life, and that was just unthinkable. It wasn't enough to have a face, you had to have a look, and oh boy, did they go all out. Some folks were born with a lopsided grin that would make a Cheshire cat envious. Then there were those cursed with a nose that grew at an alarming rate, taking its own sweet time to decide where it wanted to end up. And let's not forget the swollen jaw that made you look perpetually ready to chew scenery instead of, your vegetables. But the oddest part of all, in a world obsessed with appearances, these weren't flaws to be hidden. They were badges to be flaunted. Crooked noses, lopsided smiles, bulging eyes. They were a sign of character, a conversation starter, and a ticket to endless gossip. In a world where every inch of your body was judged, the weirder you were, the less likely you were to get lumped in with the masses. And the upper crust played this game better than anyone. With wealth came influence, and with influence came the freedom to let your freak flag fly. Nobles and royals realized that looking different wasn't just a curse, it was a superpower. In a world where royalty was everything, standing out was half the battle. It wasn't just about looking unique, it was about looking intentionally so. It was a carefully crafted performance that ensured everyone knew, I may look like a gargoyle threw up on my face, but I'm here for the coronation, not the potato harvest. They leaned into their peculiarities, turning what would have been a cause for shame into a symbol of pride. And when you're rich enough to afford the finest clothing, the silk, velvet and jewels, why not complete the ensemble with a dash of facial imperfection? It was a bold move, a daring fashion statement that said, I'm not afraid of looking different. I'm afraid of blending in. And as for the rest of us mere mortals, well, we were left to wonder how on earth did they manage to look so wonderfully weird without collapsing in on themselves. It was a mystery wrapped in a riddle and tucked inside a tapestry of societal confusion. And for our last point, please join me in imagining a world where covering up was cool, where scars were a secret weapon, and where beauty meant looking like you hadn't seen sunshine in years. Now this may sound like a bad acid trip, but it was real life in the Dark Ages. Let's rewind to a time when a smooth forehead was the height of fashion, when eyebrows were banished, and when makeup was as toxic as it was trendy. It was a look that screamed, "I don't get dirt under my nails, I get dirt under my skin," literally. Back then, concealing imperfections wasn't just a beauty trend, it was a necessity. And I don't mean hiding pimples or scratches. I'm talking about covering up those birthmarks, scars, and discolorations that were considered, well, let's just say unsightly. Smooth, pale skin was the name of the game. And if you didn't win the genetic lottery of flawless complexions, you had to fake it. Enter stage left, ladies and gents, a bag of flour. Yeah, you heard that right. Flour. It wasn't just for baking bread. It was also the go-to accessory for achieving that porcelain skin look. Now, you're probably wondering if it made them look like they had a face full of flour. Well, yes, technically. But back then, it was considered the height of sophistication, the epitome of elegance. It was basically the medieval equivalent of saying, I have nannies, so I don't need to work. So how did they do it? With the precision of a pastry chef and the patience of a saint, they applied layer after layer of flour, creating a canvas so smooth it would put a baby's bottom to shame. And for those wondering about the it factor, the X that made this look complete, they added a touch of white lead. Yep, the same stuff that later became infamous for, well, killing people. But hey, back then it was all about that toxic glow. Now, while this may sound insane in our modern context, remember, this was a time when beauty standards were askew and bizarre was beautiful. It was a world where a high forehead was worshipped, where eyebrows were shamed, and where looking pale was the ultimate flex. So, if you were born with a face full of imperfections, well, you covered them up, and you did it with style. It was a way to fit in a world that celebrated being different. It was a way to say, I may not be perfect, but I'm perfectly camouflaged. And in a world where everyone was striving to be other than themselves, that was a kind of beauty all its own. It was the age of chivalry, plagues, and really bad plumbing. Welcome to medieval beauty standards, where your value was measured in inches and ounces. Welcome to my channel. Today we're diving deep into the land of powdered wigs and teeth so white they could blind you. But wait, before we drop these jaw-dropping revelations, smash that subscribe button like you're in a blacksmithing mood. We promise you'll regret not clicking that button, because you won't see anything about plumbing again. Now let's start with hair. Oh, the locks that launched 1,000 ships, except in this case, it was more like the locks that launched 1,000 prayers to the deity for hair that didn't look like a bird's nest filled with despair. Hair too had its heavenly rules. If your locks didn't glow like divine threads spun by angels, you were already behind. Blonde hair was the look, symbol of youth, virtue, and otherworldly charm. Never mind that most people didn't naturally have it. Didn't matter. Even the Virgin Mary, painted over and over with golden tresses, was given an artistic blonde upgrade, despite geography insisting otherwise. If you were born fair-haired, congratulations, you were practically royalty by default. But the problem? Blonde hair rarely sticks around after childhood. So naturally, medieval women got inventive. Homemade lightening treatments included a delightful stew of chamomile, ash, honey, saffron, and lye. Yes, actual lye. These were applied, then left to bake in the sun during a process called sunbasking, which sounds relaxing until you remember you re-marinating your scalp in ammonia and praying your head doesn't catch fire. Some recipes even called for urine. Whose urine? Don't ask. Just know that if your hair sparkled, it was worth it. Beauty has always flirted with the grotesque, and medieval haircare was flirting with it hard. And don't even get me started on the endless varieties of wimples, nets and coifs that crowned the heads of medieval ladies. Wimples, a fancy name for a stretchy, tight-fitting band worn under your hat. They kept your hair close to the skull and kept your ears toasty. Coifs, close-fitting skull caps made of linen or wool. They were your secret weapon against bad hair days and windstorms. As for nets, they were your go-to for keeping unruly locks at bay during garden parties and jousting matches. But wait, there's more. Hair texture mattered too. Loose, flowing waves were the dream. Think soft, effortless, divine waterfall. But here's the catch. Only unmarried women could wear their hair down in public. Once married, that glorious cascade was locked away tighter than the church treasury. The moment you said, "I do," your hair became a private treasure, not to be flaunted. Enter veils, wimples, nets, and layers upon layers of modesty cloth. Because nothing says taken like a head wrapped in 3 feet of beige linen. Noble women braided, twisted, and tucked their hair into elaborate coils, often embellished with ribbons, beads, or tiny bits of embroidery. Visual reminders that they were far too refined to touch livestock. Meanwhile, men weren't left out of the fantasy. Male poets often romanticized golden-haired knights, charging into battle with their locks flying heroically in the wind, the medieval version of a shampoo ad. Hair, in many ways, was currency. To flaunt it was a message. For unmarried women, long, unbound hair signaled purity. But not too unbound. Letting it spill freely down your back was only acceptable if you were a literal saint, or seconds away from martyrdom. Otherwise, a polite braid would suffice. Once wed, hair was no longer for public consumption. The modest married woman's wardrobe included coifs, veils, and wimples, sometimes all at once. A woman's head might be swaddled like a sacred relic. Fashion? Sure, but also armor, protection from smoke, lice, and the occasional overeager lute player. The truly devout layered their coverings, a close-fitting coif under a translucent veil under a tightly pinned wimple. The result? A pious, well-bundled sandwich of social virtue, modesty with a side of fabric engineering. But modesty doesn't mean boring. As the centuries rolled on, headwear got bold. Nets were woven with gold thread. Veils were starched into stiff geometries. And some noble women wore intricate hair cages, yes, literal cages, complete with tiny jewels and even bells. Subtle? No. Effective? Absolutely. Everyone in the room knew when you turned your head. Hair wasn't just hair, it was morality, class, and allure, all wrapped up in silken restraint. And if you dared leave a curl peeking out, scandal. Or maybe fashion rebellion. Depends on how good your veil was. Of course, some women played the game smart. They let a bit of dyed hair slip through a transparent veil, technically covered but still visible, a medieval loophole. Because even in an era obsessed with rules, people still found ways to bend them beautifully. And now to the skies. Because if medieval beauty had an unspoken rule, it was this: the taller your accessories, the taller your status. And no item captured this better than the legendary hennin. You've seen them. Those soaring cone-shaped hats that look like a church bell fell in love with a curtain rod. Hennins weren't just headwear, they were architectural statements. You didn't wear a hennin. You carried it like a portable tower of power. These lofty hats, especially popular in 15th century France and Burgundy, could reach up to 2 feet tall. That's right, 2 feet of pointy silk grandeur swaying delicately above your skull as you tried not to knock over a candelabra. The higher the hennin, the higher your rank. And yes, there were casualties. Doorframes were not your friend. Neither were low ceilings or windy gardens. But it was worth it. Made of brocade, velvet, or fine silk and held together by internal wire structures, the hennin turned your head into a fashion landmark. A long veil often cascaded from the tip, floating behind you like a bridal ghost. And your hair, well, it had to be wrangled, braided tightly or shaved back at the forehead, always with that same obsession for real estate up top. Forehead room was key. If your hennin sat too far forward, it was practically a fashion felony. But the hennin was just one player in a rising vertical trend. Women also wore heart-shaped escarpons, think side buns shaped like croissants, and butterfly hennins with veils spread like wings, perfect for catching the breeze or fanning nearby suitors unconscious. Because in the world of medieval beauty, nothing was ever low-key. Now let us be honest, towering headgear that looked like it could summon lightning wasn't everyone's cup of mead. For those not. In the grand theatre of medieval Europe, where survival was the leading role and piety stole every scene, beauty had its own unique spotlight. We're not talking red carpets and designer gowns. This stage was set in churches, illuminated manuscripts, and the heart of countless sonnets. But unlike today's glossy magazines, the medieval playbook held few promises of plastic perfection. Here, beauty wasn't just about looks, it was about performance. You see, in this era of morality plays and religious pageants, the human body was a canvas, a living testament to the divine plan. Pale skin was prized. Freckles, moles, and other marks of sunshine were considered unsightly flaws, not cute quirks. They were signs of labor and exposure to the world's filth. And forget contouring. The ultimate test of beauty was having a portrait painted where you looked flawless without looking like you'd just mugged a bakery. In this episode of Obsessed, we're diving deep into the strange, surprising, and sometimes terrifying world of medieval beauty standards. If you've ever wondered why they liked their ladies pale, their gents polished, and their perfumes pungent, well, grab your powdered wig and smelling salts. We're about to unveil the secrets of medieval vanity. Let's start with the quintessential medieval beauty, the Lady of the Lake, mystical, elusive, and weirdly isolated from society. That's because medieval notions of beauty were heavily influenced by Christian ideals. This isn't your typical fairy tale. This is our host. Let's dig into some teeth. Say cheese. Now we laugh at medieval smiles, but they weren't completely off base. Back then, everyone had halitosis. To understand this, we need to rewind the clock to the days before modern plumbing, toothpaste, and indoor toilets. Dental hygiene was like Marie Antoinette at the French Revolution, toast. Sugar sweetened the medieval diet, but it was a rare treat. Think of it like the avocado toast of its time. And like avocado toast, it wrecked your teeth. Tooth decay was rampant, and pulling teeth was easier than root canals. Even nobility sought solace in fake pearly whites. And no, they didn't wear veneers. They used false teeth made from ivory, bone, or wood. Talk about a mouthful. But here's the kicker. Noble women went to great lengths to cover up these DIY gems. Why? Well, a lady's teeth were supposed to be as perfect as her character. Crooked or missing teeth were seen as flaws, not cute quirks. Remember, in medieval times, a woman's reputation was her most valuable asset. And if those pearly whites were hiding something less than perfect, they were carefully concealed. That means no flashing that dazzling smile at the market or during courtly love. In fact, covering up imperfections was a must for anyone hoping to maintain their social standing. Today, we celebrate diversity, but in the Middle Ages they celebrated uniformity, a softer, smoother complex. Now, pale skin was the name of the game. The higher the social class, the paler the complexion. Why? Well, think of the sun as your enemy. It was responsible for everything from sunburn to premature aging. In a time when beauty products were more folklore than science, protecting your skin was a status symbol. It was the original rich girl move. You see, in a world where life expectancy was unpredictable, being able to afford to stay indoors and away from the sun was a luxury. So while everyone enjoyed a nice tan, a golden glow signified hard work, not high birth. Having a pale complexion was the epitome of feminine beauty. In fact, some women took it to extremes, using lead-based cosmetics that sounded glamorous but were straight poison. For centuries, the pursuit of paleness left us with some pretty toxic beauty standards. Facial hair, or lack of it, was another point of contention. Clean-shaven was the trend for men, but not for the reasons you might think. Forget about smooth skin and the latest razors. In medieval Europe, shaving was all about showing you didn't work. Think of it as the original metrosexual movement. It was about looking sophisticated and refined without getting your hands dirty. Literally. Call it the "I don't work here, I swear." Look, for a guy like Sir Galahad, a rugged beard would suggest a life of chopping wood or guarding castles, which didn't exactly scream, "Take me to the tavern." Now, this doesn't mean that every man sported a baby face. Some noblemen did grow facial hair, but they preferred it neat and groomed. After all, it was easier to seduce a princess with a perfectly shaped beard than one that was all over the place. A well-groomed mane took time and effort, and it was a subtle flex of wealth. It showed that you could afford to spend hours on your appearance. Because remember, the goal was to look like you'd never lifted a finger in your life. Today we're all about embracing the 5 o'clock shadow, but in the Middle Ages, a neatly trimmed beard was a sign of masculinity and sophistication. It was the OG "I woke up like this" moment. But it wasn't just about what you put on your face. What you wore on it was equally important. Hats, veils, and jewelry were more than just accessories. They were statements. A woman's veil was more than a fashion statement. It was a symbol of her obedience and submission. Now, before you start channeling your inner feminist, remember that head coverings were commonplace in many societies, not just medieval Europe. It was a way of showing respect and maintaining modesty. Plus, with the sun beating down and little shade in sight, a veil also offered some much-needed protection. Then there were the hats. Forget fedoras and baseball caps. We're talking tall, pointed hats that screamed, "I'm a witch." Okay, maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but in a time when pointy hats, when we think of ancient beauty standards, images of pale skin, delicate features, and flowing locks might spring to mind. But let's pull the lens wider. What if we told you that across the vast landscapes of medieval Europe, a different standard prevailed among the nobility, an ideal that prized not fragility, but the very opposite: strength, control, and power? Welcome back. It's time to uncover more historical secrets you never knew you needed. And today, we're diving headfirst into the fascinating world of medieval beauty standards, where things are not what they seem. The obsession with appearing angelic may sound contradicting, but among the nobility of medieval Europe, it was a top priority. You see, looking pure and innocent was seen as the ultimate sign of feminine perfection. This meant complex routines of bathing, hair care, and makeup. Forget the red lips and winged eyeliner of modern times. These ladies went for the dewy, almost childlike look. They bathed frequently, not for the sake of cleanliness, but to achieve that flawless complexion. Oils and creams were their go-to, and rouge added a touch of color to their alabaster skin. However, while this standard glorified the feminine mystique, it also placed immense pressure on women to conform. Achieving this angelic look demanded a lot of time, effort, and resources. For the middle and lower classes, achieving the angelic look was simply out of reach. Their lives were harder, messier, and more exposed to the elements. Consequently, their beauty standards reflected their realities. While the elite were aiming for porcelain skin, the commoners embraced a more natural look. And it wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about societal standing. Women of the upper class had the luxury of time and resources to devote to their beauty regimens. something their less fortunate counterparts could not match. This stark contrast in beauty standards revealed the deep societal divide of the time. The allure of danger was a powerful force in medieval beauty standards, but how was it embraced? The answer lies in the art of flirtation. Men and women alike loved a good game of chase, and flirting was an essential part of it. For women, a coy smile or a knowing glance was enough to turn heads and stir desires. A subtle display of nails or a playful toss of the hair could send hearts racing. In a society where women were often confined to domestic roles, this flirtatious nature was a way to assert control over their own narrative, setting the pace and leaving men intrigued and eager for more. Teeth were everything. If your smile was dazzling, you were likely to attract attention and admiration. If it wasn't, you might be shunned, ridiculed, or worse, targeted for manipulation. Now, the easiest way to achieve that perfect smile was to keep it white and gapless, and the methods employed to do so were surprisingly modern. Women would use abrasive powders made from crushed eggshells or bone char to clean their teeth. They also used acids like vinegar or fruit extracts to remove stains. And for those without access to such treatments, plain old chewing on a hard nut was believed to help scrape away dirt and keep teeth clean. However, this seemingly simple aspect of beauty wasn't just about aesthetics. It was deeply intertwined with social standing. Those who could afford fancy imported cleaners, like the Chinese or Indian pastes, were making a statement. Their teeth gleamed brighter than the rest, signifying that they had resources and refinement. On the other hand, those whose teeth were not so pearly white were often seen as belonging to the lower classes, lacking the means for such luxuries. But having a nice smile was only half the battle. What really set the pulse racing was having lips that matched. Now, getting that perfect pout wasn't easy. It meant choosing the right shade of lipstick that complemented your skin tone and hinted at your marital status. For single women, a touch of rose or carnation pink was favored, while married women opted for deeper reds or berries. But it wasn't just about the color, it was about the ritual. Applying lipstick was a form of self-expression, a subtle yet powerful way for women to craft their public image. Fragrance wasn't just a means of masking unpleasant odors in medieval times. It was a powerful tool for seduction and self-expression. For women, perfumes were carefully chosen concoctions of flowers, herbs, spices, and sometimes animal fats. Think rose, lavender, musk, and even saffron. These scents weren't just pleasant, they were designed to leave a lasting impression. The choice of fragrance could communicate a woman's social status, age, and even marital availability. But the real magic happened when the scent lingered, becoming an invisible yet unforgettable part of her allure. Having a high, sweet singing voice was considered the ultimate feminine ideal in medieval Europe. It was a sign of beauty, femininity, and grace. Women with such voices were often celebrated in society, and their music was highly sought after. This vocal ideal, however, put enormous pressure on women to conform to these standards. Many would undergo rigorous voice training from a young age to shape their voices and hit those high notes. In the medieval era, men's beauty standards were a reflection of their times, emphasizing strength, valor, and masculinity. While women were idolized for their angelic and alluring qualities, men were celebrated for their physical prowess, martial skills, and chivalrous nature. Let's delve into the masculine ideals that dominated the medieval beauty scene. Among the medieval nobility, being tall and muscular was not just a desirable trait, it was a status symbol. Tall men were seen as more commanding and imposing, while muscular men symbolized strength and vitality. Achieving such a physique was often the result of a combination of good nutrition, active lifestyles, and rigorous exercise. For the elite, who often engaged in hunting and jousting. Maintaining a strong athletic build was not only aesthetically pleasing, but also practically necessary. A well-groomed beard wasn't just a sign of maturity, but a mark of masculinity and even sophistication in medieval Europe. Beards were meticulously styled, often shaved into specific shapes or left long and flowing, depending on the prevailing fashion. They became a canvas for self-expression and a key element of a man's allure. While women were celebrated for their long, flowing locks, medieval men sported short, practical haircuts. Long hair was seen as more feminine and impractical for men engaged in active pursuits. The favored hairstyle was often a close-cropped cut that was easy to maintain and suited for battle or strenuous activities. If the 18th century had one obsession, it was this: being tanned. But hold on, we're not talking about a Kardashian glow here. Oh no. This was a bronze that screamed hard work and outdoor adventure. A sun-kissed complexion was the ticket to the heart of every fashionable gentleman, and the path to bronzed perfection was simple. Spend copious amounts of time outdoors, preferably gallivanting across Europe or embarking on exotic travels to far-flung lands. Now, the fascination with all things tanned didn't sprout overnight. Oh no, this trend had roots that ran deep in history. Back in ancient Greece and Rome, the gods and heroes of mythology were always depicted with sun-kissed skin. It was a symbol of strength, vitality, and a life well lived. Then came the Renaissance, a period when the arts exploded with the works of Da Vinci and Michelangelo celebrating the human form. Naturally, these masterpieces were usually set outdoors, soaking up those precious rays. The message was clear. Being tanned meant you were living life to the fullest. By the 18th century, this trend had morphed into a full-blown obsession. But why were people so keen on looking like they spent more time outside than inside? Well, there's a simple answer. It was a status symbol. A tan wasn't just a skin tone, it was a badge of honor. The year is 330 BC. Alexander the Great isn't yet dead, but his empire already feels like a done deal. Persia's vast satrapies are being gobbled up like sweets at an all-you-can-eat feast. And somewhere in the burning, collapsing remains of the once proud Achaemenid domains, a group of immortals huddle around a dying fire. They are battered, hungry, ill. And if immortals are supposed to be invincible, why aren't these men running for the hills? Why aren't they striking back? Why aren't they even trying to find their king? And the answer lies in the cracks of this dying empire, in the way the immortals themselves started to fracture. These men aren't just tired, they're disillusioned, because in the absence of real leadership, their loyalty has gone where it always goes when empires crumble, to whoever pays best. The immortals were once the symbol of an idea, of control, of unflappable order. But what happens when that idea collapses? What happens to the pillars of an empire when the building itself is on fire? Something born of a dream dies differently, slowly, painfully, bitterly. It doesn't vanish with a bang. It withers away with a whimper. To understand how, we have to go back to the beginning, to Cyrus the Great. The story of the Achaemenid Empire is usually told through the lens of brutality, of subjugated peoples, of kingdoms burned and razed. But Cyrus, despite the battles and conquests, is almost endearingly naive. After sacking Babylon, for instance, instead of enslaving the Jews, he issued a decree, probably written on a clay cylinder, that they should be free to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. He sounds almost cutely tolerant, like an old-world monarch who thinks he's enlightened. But in reality, Cyrus was playing realpolitik. He'd conquered Babylon, but much of Mesopotamia was still in rebel rousing. So he granted the Jews religious freedom. Anyone willing to come back to Jerusalem and help rebuild the city and the temple would be exempt from taxes and free from compulsory military service. It was a shrewd political gamble, one that paid off because Cyrus played into existing sentiments. There was power in a king who allowed people to pray. As Cyrus spread his dominion, he repeated the trick, offering religious tolerance wherever he went. And this wasn't just good PR, it was a genuine understanding of the region he ruled. And Cyrus was hardly alone. Cambyses, the boy king who succeeded him, offered similar concessions. It was during Darius's reign that things shifted, hardening the Achaemenid attitude to religion, culture, and most importantly, rebellion. The story of how he handled the revolt of Babylon is chilling. He crushed it violently, brutally, personally supervising the massacre of thousands. And after that, the gloves came off. Darius favored strength over subtlety, brutality over benevolence, and it filtered down. His officials were given simple orders: stamp out dissent, keep order, and build infrastructure. The Immortals were part of this new policy, designed to reflect and enforce it. Once impeccable manners became harsh, dismissive. Tolerance hardened into persecution, and the vast majority of the Persian subjects never forgot. That wasn't just true of the Babylonians, it was true of the Egyptians, the Scythians, the Greeks, the Jews. Across the empire there was a growing sense that the golden days of easy coexistence were over. Cyrus and Cambyses might have been kings of conciliation, but Darius was king of consequence, and those consequences would reverberate through the empire long after Darius was dead. You see, the Immortals were less a fighting force and more an instrument of the new hard power that defined the midpoint of the Achaemenid Empire. They were the blunt end of Darius's will, smashing and binding recalcitrant provinces into submission. They were also the sharp end, reminding the rest of the empire of what happened to those who defied the king. In essence, they were the worst parts of Darius' personality, magnified and weaponized. For Darius, it seems, hated being challenged. To rule an empire that stretched from Central Asia to the Mediterranean took cunning, tolerance, some generosity, and above all, humility. Darius wasn't wired for that. He ruled according to a simple equation: power equals submission. If you submit, you live. If you resist, you die. And that message was carried by the Immortals. In every province, they were the reminder of the king's awesome but limited patience. Now, this isn't to paint Darius as a cartoon villain. He had qualities, plenty of them, but the lesson here is that empires change, they mature, they make deals, they bend. But when they calcify, their softness becomes hardness, their moderation becomes extremism, and when that happens, something like the Immortals reflects it. They morph from an ideal into an instrument of coercion. Their flexibility, once their strength, becomes a weapon. Their uniformity, once their pride, becomes a tool of control. It's a tale as old as empires themselves, really. You see, empires grow complex. They make promises they can't keep. They become addicted to their own myths. And when that happens, they stop acting in their own interest. They start acting in the interest of appearing strong. But appearances are deceptive, and the stronger an empire wants to look, the weaker it becomes. Take the Roman Empire, for instance. Imagine you're a Roman senator around the year 200 AD. The empire's at peace, its borders stabilized, its legions stationed, its economy stagnant. In fact, it hasn't grown in decades. Now imagine Marcus Aurelius decides he needs a huge, flashy victory. He raises an army of 200,000 men, marches them east, defeats the Marcomanni. What's the point of this? Well, Marcus Aurelius gets to tell the Senate, look how strong I am, look how big my army is. But the legions stationed in Britain, in Dacia, in Africa, suddenly have gaps in their supply lines. Veteran soldiers have been taken from them. The budget has been drained, those provinces left undefended. And the next threat, maybe from Germanic tribes, comes along. What happens then? Rome's external stability is bought with internal decay. Its leader is hailed as a conqueror. But at what cost? That's what we're seeing in Achaemenid Persia. Darius built his empire on brutality, and that meant he was collecting enemies. Loyalties hardened. People were branded. And the Immortals, once the epitome of Persian flexibility, became a creature of that rigidity. In Darius's wars, the enemies were clear: the Babylonians, the Scythians, the Greeks. But the nature of war changed. Cyrus and Cambyses fought fluid conflicts. The army grew in size and skill as they campaigned. Darius's wars were clean, short, decisive. And the Immortals, built to campaign across the whole empire, suffered from that structure. The army might have gotten bigger, but the Immortals stayed the same size. They weren't allowed to adapt, to learn, to grow, and eventually that arrested development caught up with them. You see, the Achaemenids preferred diplomacy and conquest. The Greeks got that memo, and they had something else: the polis, or city-state. A lot of modern ideas about the ancient Greeks are romanticized, but one truth rings clear: they knew how to fight. In pitched battles, in sieges, in guerrilla raids, the Spartans at Thermopylae are the poster boys for that, sure. But look at Athens in the Peloponnesian War. Even as they lost the Acropolis to the Spartans, they kept sending ships and reinforcements until they couldn't anymore. The Greeks fought with personal and civic pride, while the Achaemenids fought for kings and tribute. And that difference was starkest at sea. We think of naval warfare as neat columns of ships maneuvering and firing broadsides, but Persian navies were more like flotillas, each commanded by a satrap with loyalties as scattered as their ships. The Immortals weren't equipped to operate on the water. They were designed for land. And that geographic limitation mirrored the empire's overall issue. Darius created an administrative marvel, but it was a top-heavy system. Power flowed from the center. Satraps raised funds, recruited troops, and answered to the king. But if that flow of information and resources was cut off, what happened then? What happened to those Immortals in the far corners of the empire when Darius died? Well, they learned what every soldier learns: survival. They picked sides, the highest bidder, the strongest claimant. They abandoned their oaths and their armor. Some of them betrayed their own kind. Others sold their skills to the enemy. It was a steady disintegration, because nothing lasts forever. Not even empires. Sometimes empires are undone by outside forces, by rival nations, or there are some lines you just can't erase. Not with water, not with blood, not with anything. Like when Darius III rides into battle beside the Immortals, knowing that if he falls, another will rise in his place. And when Alexander conquers the Persian capital, finding the palace empty because the Immortals have vanished. Or that little girl facing the thorn hedge, deciding whether she has a choice in life or only a choice in death. The Immortals come up often in stories about Alexander the Great, but they also loom large in the lore of the kingdoms that opposed him, not because they were invincible, but because they were implacable. Herodotus tells us they had no fear, no fatigue, no end. But maybe that's the part we miss. The Immortals weren't just great tactically or materially, they were great in concept, which is why they endured so long and why their legend took root. We think of them as an instrument of terror, a wall of steel. But the reality was far more subtle, and perhaps more unsettling. They were a solution to problems that other armies never even realized they had. And Alexander saw that. After they fell, he folded their traditions into his own elite guard, taking their symbols and some of their tactics. But he was careful to leave their origins intact. Why? Because the way an army functions isn't just about the weapons it wields. It's about the framework it's built on. The chain of command, the logistics, the discipline, all of those things are just as important as armor or training. And for the Immortals, it all came back to recruitment. If you wanted to join them, there was no conscription, no draft. You couldn't bribe your way in. You had to prove yourself worthy. The only way in was through years of proving yourself outside. The commitment was lifelong. And if you faltered, you didn't just lose your place in the ranks, you lost your head. That level of dedication created loyalty that ran deeper than blood. It created brotherhoods forged in shared risk and the tacit understanding of knowing that if your neighbor slipped, you had to be ready to step in and fill his shoes. If you blinked, you died. If you faltered, you died. If you failed, you died. And that black mirror of success or death drove perfection. What makes the Immortals fascinating isn't their weapons, it's their drive. No overseer could spot a slip. There was no chance for error. Every move was rehearsed so often that men almost moved as one. But it went beyond muscle memory. It went to the bone. Their posture, their stride, their bearing, their focus. Even their sleep patterns were designed to push out individuality. Anything that made them less than perfect, anything that made them prone to doubt or distraction, was clipped away. You didn't belong to yourself. You belonged to the group. Your identity became your function. Your perfection became your burden. It's hard for us to imagine today, but for much of history, armies were different. Soldiers were farmers who picked up a spear in the spring and hoped for peace before winter. Tactics were simple, discipline was often non-existent, and victory was decided by courage, not coordination. It wasn't until the late 600s BC, when the Assyrian Empire started forming standardized units, that things really began to change. But the Assyrians were motivated by plunder, not by patriotism. Loyalty was to a warlord, not to a state. The Persian Empire changed all that. The Immortals didn't fight for wealth. They fought for an idea of flawless execution. Success wasn't measured in gold or glory. It was measured in each perfect parade, in every precise maneuver, in every time they took the field and didn't break. That idea was held up by a complex system of rewards and punishments. Those who performed well were rewarded with promotion, land, and honors. But for the vast majority, progress was nearly impossible. They spent decades repeating the same drills, learning the same techniques, polishing the same armor. It was a gilded cage. Rewards were great, but advancement was near impossible. And if you weren't getting better, you were falling behind. It doesn't sound like paradise, but for some, it was exactly what they wanted. Dedication, not opportunity, was the path to greatness. But how did they keep it going? How did they keep the gears of perfection turning for decades, centuries, millennia? Well, it starts with the question, how did they replace fallen immortals? The answer is so simple, it's almost counterintuitive. They replaced them with better immortals. It sounds insane, but think about it. Imagine having a job where you were judged by the tiniest slip, the smallest mistake. What would happen to your colleagues if you messed up? Nothing. Someone else would take their place. So how would you ensure that your job was safe? You wouldn't relax. You'd work harder, train harder, push yourself harder than anyone else. And if someone else slipped up, you'd be ready to slide into their position. That's the secret of the Immortals. Their failures didn't weaken the unit. They strengthened it. When a soldier fell, it didn't mean the end of his story. It meant the start of a new chapter. He'd simply find a new post, a new duty, and a new set of challenges. But the pressure was still the same. The goal was still the same. And the consequences of slipping were still eternal. So the replacement system wasn't just efficient, it was brutally effective. Any unit can maintain itself. The Immortals constantly improved themselves. Now, you might think the Immortals were a masterclass in obedience and conformity, and you'd be right. But they also valued skill. The Scythians rode like spirits across the wind, their horses almost as legendary as their riders. They raced, they jumped, they pounced. For them, a mount wasn't just a beast of burden, it was an extension of their will. Their bow never wavered, their quiver was always full. They moved like the grassland itself, graceful and deadly, and that was their weapon. Not brute force, but pure grace. But what tied them together? The answer is right there in the open range, in the endless sky above them. Freedom. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom to roam. In a world of rigid borders and strict patrols, the Scythians roamed. And in that roaming, they built an empire. Their whole life was built around horses. Boys started riding before they could walk. Their graves are filled with bridles and bits. Their art is splashed with horsepower. They weren't a nomad tribe. They were a force of nature. And that's why they fascinated the Greeks so much. In a world of well-trodden paths and predictable patterns, the Scythians were chaos, a wild card, and the Greeks couldn't get enough. They traded with them, fought alongside them, and listened to their stories. And among those stories, there was one they kept coming back to. There was a people beyond the sea, beyond the sun, a place where the sky scraped against the earth, where giants roamed and the river of gold flowed, and in the center of it all, a city of ice and light. And it wasn't just a story, it was a beacon, because in the end, the Scythians weren't bound by blood, ethnicity, or creed. They were bound by a thirst for exploration, a hunger to push past the known and discover what lay beyond the next hill or the next horizon. Alexander himself marveled at the Scythians when he met them. He admired their horse skills, he marveled at their confidence, and when he heard their stories, he did something unexpected. He joined them. He rode with them across the steppes, listened to their bards, learned their ways. For a brief moment, he wasn't the conqueror. He was the student. But the difference between the Scythians and Alexander's armies was also the reason for their doom. They were fantastic. But ultimately, they were freelancers. No matter how tight their bonds, no matter how strong their desire for exploration, they were still independent. And when empires crumbled, they scattered. They were blown by the winds of war. Sometimes they reformed, sometimes they fell. But they never stayed in one place long enough to build something permanent. Their legacy lives on in their graves, in their art, and in the myths they inspired. But the world they shaped didn't last. It shifted as quickly as they'd appeared. Ever wondered why women's history is so hard to find? It's not because it was missing, it was taken away, stolen by emperors and empires, erased by historians in smoky rooms. They wiped her names from statues. They softened her triumphs in textbooks. They shoved her into fairy tales. They buried her legacy deeper than any tomb. And when they couldn't erase her altogether, they tried to rewrite her. Turn queens into princesses, warriors into wives, battles into balls. But look closer. Beneath the satin and the silver, you'll find the steel. It's time to dig beneath the surface, because this isn't a fairy tale. This is the world rewriting itself. And if you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe the channel now. The best place to start? Well, how about with a kingdom? Not just any kingdom, mind you. The kingdom of Dahomey in what is today Benin. Back in the 1700s, it was a warrior state, powerful, brutal, and fiercely independent. Their secret weapon? The agogi, an elite military force of female warriors. Selected as children for their strength, defiance, or sheer willpower, the agogiers were taken from their families and placed under the king's direct command. There were no exceptions, no softness, no escape. Their childhoods didn't end. They were cut away. Training was brutal, calculated to break what could be broken and sharpen what remained. They sprinted through thorn hedges barefoot. They fought each other with live blades. They swore celibacy, swore allegiance, swore never to retreat. Loyalty to the king wasn't a choice, it was oxygen. Their uniforms were symbolic but deadly, braided sashes across the chest, muskets slung over shoulders, machetes glinting at the hip. But their true edge wasn't steel, it was fearlessness. The kind of calm that made even experienced European officers shudder. One French commander during the colonial campaigns described watching one of these warriors, a single woman, sprint toward a soldier, slice open his throat with terrifying precision, then pause, and casually wipe her blade clean like she was clearing her nails. That wasn't savagery, that was ritual, that was control. These women weren't mascots or bodyguards. The agogiers were shock troops, first in, last out. They didn't camp behind the lines, they led the charge. In the brutal Franco-Dahomey Wars of the 1890s, these women squared off against French soldiers with modern rifles and artillery, and still managed to launch deadly ambushes under the cover of night. Street by street, grove by grove, they fought like wildfire, unshaken by the odds. They didn't win every battle, but they forced the French, colonial juggernauts who thought they'd crush Dahomey in a weekend, to pause, to adapt, to reconsider every assumption they had about women and war. But the Agoji weren't just a military force. They were a paradox, warriors in a deeply patriarchal world who carved out autonomy not through quiet diplomacy, but through blades and blood. They advised kings, they led ceremonies, they were symbols and weapons both at once. In a world that demanded they be small, they stood colossal. Even after the fall of Dahomey, their legend refused to die. Instead, it multiplied. Today, you will see echoes of the Agoji in fiction, like the Dora Milaje in Marvel as Black Panther. But make no mistake, reality came first, and it was far more savage, far more sacred, and far more unforgettable. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe the channel now. These women didn't whisper history, they roared it. But let's travel further, from Africa's fire to Japan's steel. Because in the shadowed corners of medieval Japan, another woman stepped out of myth and into the battlefield. Her name, Tomoe Gozen. A name that still feels like the sound of a blade being drawn. She wasn't born into legend. She carved it with her own hands. It's the late 12th century. Civil war tears Japan apart. The Minamoto and Taira clans clash for power. Samurai codes are being written in blood. And in the center of it all stands Tomoe, not in the kitchen, not behind a noble husband, but at the front of the battlefield. Armor on her shoulders, bow in her hands, and eyes like lightning storms. She served Minamoto no Yoshinaka, a warlord, and some whisper her lover. But Tomoe wasn't a concubine in armor. She was a commander, trained in Kyudo, Kenjutsu, and the tactics of war. She was said to be strikingly beautiful. White skin, flowing hair, elegant features. But the next line in the scrolls hits like thunder. She was worth 1,000 warriors. That's not a compliment, that's a reckoning. At the Battle of Awazu in 1184, as Yoshinaka's forces were encircled and collapse loomed, he ordered a final stand. Some legends say he begged Tomo to flee. She refused. She turned, faced a charging enemy samurai, and, according to the Heike Monogatari, dismounted him, wrestled him to the ground, and beheaded him in one clean motion. Then she got back on her horse and rode into chaos like death itself wore silk sleeves. What happened to her afterward is a mystery. Some say she was captured and forced into marriage. Others claim she became... In ancient Greece, the heroes were men of action, strong men, mighty warriors, strategists of war. But behind the scenes, in the shadows of greatness, lived a woman named Nakano. She wasn't a queen, she wasn't a priestess. She was a shinobi, a member of the feared samurai clan in feudal Japan. Her father, Masamune, was a low-ranking general, a soldier of fortune. Her mother, Taki, was a concubine. Nakano grew up on the edge of privilege, learning the ways of the sword and the secrets of survival. Her story is told in the scrolls of the Shimazu clan, tales passed down through generations, and it reads like a warrior poem straight out of legend. By age 15, Nakano was married off to a young lord named Ujisato, but their marriage was childless and their happiness was short-lived. Ujisato died and Nakano found herself alone, but not for long. She soon became the concubine of another lord, a powerful samurai named Ishikawa Gamon. He was almost twice her age, but age meant nothing in the harsh hierarchy of their world. Power, lineage, and loyalty were currency, and Nakano understood its value better than anyone. When Gamon fell ill, and his wife, Lady She bore 2 sons, securing her place in the household and cementing a bond with Lady Hoshi. It seemed like Nakano was finally finding a place in the turbulent sea of her world. Or so it seemed. Then came the Battle of Seki, a clash between rival samurai clans. And when Gammon was injured, it was Nakano who stepped onto the battlefield, defying tradition and wielding a blade. She fought with the ferocity of a cornered tigress, slicing through enemies until she faced an opponent named Musashibo Benkei. He was a giant, a mountain of muscle and steel, but Nakano wasn't intimidated. Witnesses say she struck him down in close quarters. Her sword flashed like lightning, leaving a deep gash across his chest. Benkei staggered back, clutching his wound. He cursed Nakano, vowing revenge, but she was ready for him. Before he could react, Nakano pressed her attack, plunging her katana into his heart. Benkei gasped, collapsing onto his shield. His massive frame slumped to the ground, a testament to Nakano's skill and courage. With her victory, Nakano secured her family's honor and her place in samurai lore. But the battlefield was a harsh mistress, and there was no time to savor the victory. She knew that Benkei's allies were regrouping, their eyes burning with vengeance. But as she turned to flee, she was surrounded. Swords flashed, arrows flew, and Nakano found herself trapped. Realizing that capture meant defilement, humiliation, and a fate worse than death, Nakano did the unthinkable. She called out to her sister, Tamaki, a young woman known for her quick wit and even quicker blade. Nakano's voice echoed across the battlefield, carrying a message that no one would forget. She told Tamaki to behead her, to sever her head from her body and bury it beside her sword. And as if possessed by a warrior spirit, Tamaki did as she was told. She charged into the fray, her katana singing a song of death and defiance. Tamaki moved like a phantom, leaving a trail of severed heads and broken bodies in her wake. When the dust settled, Nakano lay on the ground, her life ebbing away. Her gaze, however, remained fixed on the sky, as if watching something beyond the battlefield. Tamaki stood over her sister, her blade dripping with the blood of their enemies. But now a new task awaited her. With trembling hands, she lifted her katana for one last time and cut off Nakano's head. The severed head was placed beside the katana, forming a solemn pair of symbols, forever bound in loyalty and sacrifice. In the coming days, Nakano's story spread like wildfire across the land, carrying tales of her bravery and her chilling last request. Her remains were buried in Fukushima, a tomb that became a site of pilgrimage for samurai seeking inspiration and solace. Today, centuries after her heroic stand, Nakano is remembered not just as a skilled samurai woman, but as the final samurai woman to die in battle. Her story echoes through the ages, serving as a reminder that the true spirit of the warrior knows no bounds of gender, modernity, or insurmountable odds. Now imagine yourself transported back to the era of World War II. Europe is a storm-tossed sea of conflict, and amidst this chaos emerges a figure who silenced the guns and stirred the souls of millions. Meet Lyudmila Pavlichenko, a name that sends shivers down the spines of Nazis everywhere. But this is no ordinary tale. Oh no, this is a legend forged in the fires of war, a legend that earned her the chilling title of Lady Death. Born in 1916 in what is now Ukraine, Lyudmila was far from the typical sniper. She didn't start out aiming for the stars. Her early life was rooted in the soil of reality. She studied history at university, dreaming of a world filled with books, not bullets. But as the Nazis swept across Ukraine in 1941, her peaceful aspirations were shattered. Like a lone eagle, she took flight, answering the call of duty. She traded her textbooks for a rifle, determined to protect her homeland from the clutches of tyranny. When the Germans approached Odessa, Lyudmila found herself standing shoulder to shoulder with fellow defenders. Her initial days were a baptism by fire. On October 8, 1941, she joined the 25th Rifle Division. And when the Red Army retreated, she became part of the Second Shock Army. She was no ordinary soldier. At the firing range, she demonstrated extraordinary skills, proving that she was born for the battlefield. Soon, her reputation as a sniper soared like a hawk in the sky. She hunted down German soldiers and officers with unwavering precision, eliminating threats from afar. And let's not forget the stakes. This was World War II, a war that painted targets with fear and desperation. Survival often hinged on a single bullet. As Lyudmila stalked her prey, she saw not just enemies, but reflections of the lives that were lost to the war. For every fallen Nazi, she mourned the potential for life extinguished. By the end of December 1941, she had earned the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, a recognition of her unparalleled bravery. But her legend wasn't confined to the battlefields of Russia. It resonated across the world. And in 1945, as the tide of war shifted, she embarked on a new mission. She crossed the Atlantic Ocean, stepping onto American soil as a guest of honor. She met with First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, a meeting that symbolized the unity of nations. Lyudmila captivated audiences with tales of her exploits, becoming a living embodiment of resilience and strength. And when an American journalist asked her whether women should fight, she didn't flinch. "I am 25 years old," she stated matter-of-factly. "I have killed 309 fascist invaders. Do you not think that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" Mic drop. After the war, she returned to university, picking up her studies as if no time had passed. She carved out a life marked by quiet strength, but her name still echoes through the halls of military academies worldwide, a shining beacon for aspiring soldiers. And that's our show for today. 2 women, 2 worlds, 2 incredible stories. Now remember when we talked about the lyre and the aulos? There's something else, something crazy. The very first known depiction of an aulos player, well, it's on a vase painting that also has a lyre. It's like they knew they had to show both sides of the coin, the untamed and the harmonious. What does that tell you about the ancient world? I don't know. Maybe they were more complex than we give them credit for. Anyway, what do you think? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked this episode, hit that subscribe button. Until next time, stay curious. I'll see you then. The sikus were more than music. They were a link to the mountains, to nature, to the spirits. Inca royalty was said to play them to commune with the divine, with Pachamama, the Earth Mother. In Quechua, the Inca language, the siku is called the Cana, meaning Song of the Winds. And indeed its notes echoed with mountain breezes, telling stories of heroes, gods, and daily life. Can you imagine anything more haunting than a lone traveler playing the siku high in the Altiplano, the music floating across desolate plains, carrying news, or maybe even a lonely heart's desire to the wind? In fact, it wasn't just about solo melodies. Panpipes formed ensembles. Musicians arranged themselves around a central fire or a ceremonial rock, creating a ring of sound, weaving their music together in harmony, much like those breathtaking circle dances of the Native Americans. This tradition goes back millennia, rooted in pre-Columbian rites, but still alive today in the dances of Bolivia, Peru, and Argentina. In these places, the siku isn't just played, it's breathed. The music rises and falls like the terrain itself, mimicking the llamas climbing slopes, the condors circling overhead, even the earthquakes that shook their world. Music in the Andes wasn't just oral, it was a lived experience. It wove into festivals, rituals, dances, even daily life. Festivals celebrating harvest, the rain, even the return of the sun after winter, each had its own music and dance, its own instruments and energy. Weddings weren't just celebrations of love, they were orchestras of celebration. Funerals weren't just rites of passage, they were symphonies of remembrance. Even work wasn't solitary. Miners didn't toil in silence. They sang. Laborers didn't sweat in quiet. They drummed and chanted. The Andes teemed with music. Ancient Peru wasn't the only place. Throughout South America, people expressed themselves through music, whether the charango in Bolivia, a tiny guitar-like instrument, or the zampoña in Argentina, another type of panpipes, or the quena, a flute carved from the giant reeds that grew by the lakes. Each region, each culture had its own sounds, its own stories to tell. So let's leave the peaks for a moment and drift across the lowlands. All along the Amazon, the Orinoco, and even in the heart of the jungle, music thrived. For example, the macadisho, a wooden flute from the Choco people of Colombia. They made it from bamboo, playing soft tunes during feasts and ceremonies. And in Venezuela, you had the arpa, a harp-like instrument plucked during parties and social gatherings. They even had the bandola, a small guitar-like instrument, mostly played by cowboys on ranches. Even in the remote areas where rubber tappers worked, music wasn't absent. Rhythms pulsed through the trees as workers tapped rubber and dreamed of faraway cities. As you can see, there wasn't just one style of music in pre-Columbian America. There were hundreds, thousands. Each group, each community added its own melody to the continent's songbook. But why? Why was music so ubiquitous? Well, think about it. In a world before radios and streaming services, before iPhones and playlists, music was how they kept memories alive. It was their historian, their storyteller. Through music, they shared myths about gods who created the world, legends of heroes and magical creatures, tales of everyday life. Music was also how they bonded. Whether singing while working long stretches of land or dancing at celebrations, music wove communities together. And finally, music was their connection to the unseen. From the mountains to the jungle, music was used in rituals, in ceremonies. It was a way to honor nature, to communicate with the gods, to pay respect to the dead. In short, music was life. It was woven into every aspect of existence, just like the ancient Egyptians. Now, if you love stories like this, please remember to support us. Your support keeps us going. And if you want to know more about the music of the ancients, stay tuned, because we've barely scratched the surface. We haven't even talked about the Greeks yet, and their epic poems set to music. But for now, let me ask you a question. What do you think? How did music shape these ancient societies? And how do you see it shaping our world today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. You might also want to check out our video on the ancient Greek lyre, which really helped shape Western music. It's linked somewhere here. And until next time, keep making some noise. After all, it's what makes us human. Music has always been more than just sound. It's a thread weaving through the tapestry of human history, carrying echoes of cultures long gone. When you listen to ancient music, you're not just hearing notes, you're connecting to souls separated by millennia. So join me on a sonic journey. We'll cross continents and time itself to explore how music has kept memories alive. In Peru, nestled high above the clouds, the wind carries whispers of a lost world. It brushes against the stones of Machu Picchu, the citadel of the Incas, and seems to stir forgotten tunes into the air. Imagine standing amidst these ruins, feeling the mist of the Andes around you, and hearing a faint melody float over the mountains. What if that song could take you back to a time before clocks or calendars, to a civilization that understood the secrets of the stars? The music of the Andes isn't just ancient tunes. It's a language older than words, a story told without a single syllable. The heart of it all was the siku, a set of pipes bound together, each producing a single note. These weren't solitary instruments. They were conversation pieces. Two musicians would share one siku, each taking turns to play, creating a dialogue of sound. Together, they'd form complex harmonies, but alone they could only manage a fragment of the song. It was a reflection of their world, where balance and duality were sacred, where the universe was seen as a web of interconnected parts. The siku wasn't just an instrument, it was a way of life. It taught that one person couldn't create a complete melody. It needed the other. It needed the wind, the clouds, the Andes towering above. This idea of reciprocity wasn't limited to music. It permeated Inca culture. Look at their terraced farms clinging to mountain slopes. The ingenuity of the Inca people allowed them to grow crops on unforgiving terrain, ensuring they never went hungry. In return, they honored the mountains, the clouds, the winds, and the stars in their music and ceremonies. Everything was part of a greater whole, and everything had its role. The music of the Andes is a testament to this philosophy. It bridges the gap between the individual and the cosmos. And in doing so, it gives us a glimpse into a world where music wasn't just entertainment. It was the very essence of existence. But music doesn't need words to convey stories. Listen to the drums echoing through the chambers of an ancient Khmer temple in Angkor Thom. Can you hear it? The steady pulse resonating with the heartbeat of the ages. This is the Bayon, a temple built by Jayavarman VII around 1200 AD. It was a city of devotion, a testament to the divine power of the Khmer king who saw himself as a god on earth. And at the heart of it all, where colossal faces peer into eternity, there are carvings that tell a different kind of story. Imagine a bustling marketplace, merchants haggling over spices, artisans showcasing their wares, and amid the clamor, the rhythmic pulse of a drum. Now picture a royal procession winding through the same market, the king at its center, his face serene, almost godlike, and following him, a troupe of dancers. They aren't just dancing, they are telling stories, narrating tales of gods and demons, of battles and triumphs, and accompanying them is the sound of a large drum, the sound of royalty, the sound of power. Fast forward to another corner of the empire. Imagine yourself here in the jungle temple of Ta Prohm, where nature has reclaimed the ancient stones, where vines crawl up the walls, almost trying to rewrite the history etched into them. And then you hear it. A smaller, more intimate drum being played, perhaps by a group of travelers seeking refuge from the jungle's embrace, or by pilgrims on their way to a sacred site. In both cases, it's not just a drum beat. It's a narrative thread woven into the fabric of ancient Cambodia. It's a reminder that history isn't just carved in stone, it's resonated in rhythm. The music of the Khmer civilization, much like the vast empire it served, is layered, powerful, and enduring. It speaks to us across the centuries, reminding us that music is more than just sound. It's a storyteller, it's a keeper of culture, a time traveler, and most importantly, a memory weaver. Now let's cross the ocean to ancient Egypt, where music wasn't just an art form, it was a divine offering. Picture this. The year is 3000 BC, and the Nile River is alive with activity. Boats glide across its surface, laden with goods and people making their way to the great city of Memphis. Amidst the bustle, you spot a musician, not just any musician, a harpist. His harp is more than just an instrument. It's a portal to the gods, and as he strums the strings, it's not just music that fills the air, but invocations, prayers, and offerings to the divine. This isn't mere entertainment. This is religious devotion in sound. Now, transport yourself to the Valley of the Kings, where the pharaohs found their eternal rest. Deep inside the labyrinthine tombs, hidden from the prying eyes of the world, are scenes carved into the walls, scenes that seem almost surreal. You see musicians playing not just harps, but also lutes and flutes, their music serenading the pharaohs on their journey into the afterlife. They aren't playing for our entertainment. They are guiding the pharaohs with their music, ensuring their safe passage to the realm of the dead. Egyptian music wasn't just about the notes, it was about the journey of the soul. It blended the earthly and the otherworldly, making it an integral part of their religion. It was a way to honor the gods, to communicate with the dead, and to celebrate life in the shadow of eternity. As you explore the relics of ancient Egypt, from the Great Sphinx to the Temple of Karnak, remember that music wasn't just absent, it was vital. It was a language that transcended the boundaries of the human world and reached into the very core of the divine. Music is more than just sound. It's a legacy that echoes through the corridors of time. It's a way to understand civilizations not just through their ruins, but through their rituals. So keep listening, keep exploring, and remember, every note you hear is a step closer to understanding the souls that lived thousands of years ago. Music is a universal language that speaks directly to the soul. So when you hear the echoes of ancient melodies, don't just listen. Respond. Let the music carry you back in time, allowing you to experience the world through the eyes and ears of those who came before us. For in doing so, you'll discover that history isn't just in books or museums. It's in the very essence of the music that still resonates within you. And if that journey through time resonated with you, know that you're part of a vast community of history enthusiasts who find wonder in the echoes of the past. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Your support lets us keep unearthing stories that deserve to be heard. And hey, who knows? You might just find that your own story is waiting to be discovered in the notes of an ancient melody. Until then, keep listening, keep exploring, and remember, history isn't just in the past. It's alive in the music that still echoes within us. Here's the truth. Most of the sounds from the ancient world are gone forever, drowned out by the sands of time or silenced by civilizations lost. All we have are names like Pythagoras or Enheduanna, scribbled on clay tablets, etched on crumbling stone. But between those faded letters and our modern ears, there's a chasm of centuries. So how do we bridge it? How do we hear the harp of Orpheus or the aulos of Greece? We piece together clues, archaeological finds, written records, and then we imagine. We fill in the silence with intuition and artistry. And that's why when you listen to these pieces, you won't hear electric guitars or synthesized drums. You'll hear acoustic instruments, harps, lyres, flutes, drums. Why? Because those are the tools of the ancients, the ones whose fingerprints we find on artifacts, whose melodies we glimpse in hieroglyphs. It's like a puzzle. Each artifact is a piece, and the image on that piece is the music, a missing chord, a half-remembered beat, a fragment of melody. We put it all together and try to hear the whole picture. But here's the beauty. Even if our reconstruction isn't perfect, even if some notes are flat or rhythms are off, we're still connecting. We're speaking a language older than words, a dialogue across time. It's not flawless, but it's real. And that's the power of music. It survives, it adapts, it resonates. In the 21st century, we can pick up an instrument and play a tune from 4,000 years ago. We can close our eyes and imagine the vibrations echoing around ancient walls or on desert winds. We can feel the heartbeat of humanity before nation, state, or creed existed. Music like this cuts through superficial differences and touches something deep within us. It's primal. It's instinctive. When we hear a powerful chord progression, a surprising rhythmic shift, a haunting melody, we respond because music is a universal language. It transcends borders and generations. It doesn't matter if we're Pictish, Persian, Greek, Goth, Egyptian, Hittite, or Han Chinese. If a piece is strong enough, it moves us. It stirs memories, awakens emotions, and opens doors to cultures vastly different from our own. So whether you're a musician, historian, anthropologist, or just someone who loves great tunes, stick around. You're about to go back in time. You're about to hear music unlike anything you've heard before, because the best is yet to come.